The eternal waltz of shadows. The kingdom's twilight was the thing of legend, a half-light that stretched the hours of day into an endless, gilded reverie. Beneath its indigo sky, Prince Caelus wandered the boundaries of his land, drawn ever further by an unspoken yearning. The castle that lay shrouded at the edge of his kingdom had always been an enigma, a silent sentinel of time's passing. It stood wrapped in ivy and rumor, untouched by the living for as long as memory served. One evening, the prince found himself at its gates, his steed restless beneath him. The air was heavy with the scent of aged stone and forgotten stories. The gates swung open without a touch, inviting him inward. It was not an invitation he could refuse. Curiosity was a thread that pulled him forward. Inside, darkness embraced him, but only for a moment. As his boots clicked against the marble floor, the air came alive with a golden light. Lanterns ignited in a perfect ripple, revealing a vast ballroom that stretched beyond comprehension. It was a realm of silk and shadow, of music that seemed to hum not from instruments, but from the very bones of the castle. The prince stood frozen, his breath caught by the sheer majesty of it all. Everywhere, masked figures glided through the air, their gowns trailing like whispers, their laughter soft and sharp as glass. The masks they wore were as diverse as the stars, some feathered, some gilded, some cruelly wrought in the shapes of beasts. "Welcome," a voice purred near his ear. He turned to see a woman clad in crimson, her mask a delicate lattice of silver vines. Her eyes, half hidden, glittered like obsidian. "You are our newest guest." "I wasn't aware I was expected," Caelus replied, his voice calm, though his pulse quickened. She smiled, but the expression felt rehearsed, as though it had been practiced 1,000 times. "Oh, but everyone finds their way here eventually." She gestured towards the center of the room, where the dancers wove an intricate spiral. "Please, join the dance." The prince hesitated, his instincts urging him to question the nature of the gathering. But the music shifted, pulling at something primal within him. Before he could resist, he found himself stepping onto the marble floor. A woman in a mask of onyx and pearl took his hand, and the dance began. The world blurred as he moved, each step guided by forces he could not name. The music carried him like a tide, rising and falling with an intoxicating rhythm. The masked guests wove around him in perfect harmony, their movements so fluid they seemed to defy gravity. But as the hours stretched on, unease began to creep into his heart. The music did not falter, nor did the revelers tire. There were no moments of rest, no changes in tempo, only the endless cadence of the waltz. Time itself seemed to pause, and the prince could no longer tell if he had been dancing for minutes or days. He sought an escape from the dance, weaving through the throng of masked faces. He found himself at the edge of the ballroom, where shadows clung like cobwebs. There, an old man cloaked in midnight hues watched him, with eyes that seemed to pierce the fabric of his soul. "Young prince," the man said, his voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "You've stepped into the realm of the Masked Eternum. You cannot leave until you understand the cost of your desires." The words chilled Caelus, though he did not fully grasp their meaning. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady despite the cold dread spreading in his chest. The old man chuckled, the sound brittle and hollow. "A guest, like all the others. But unlike you, I know the truth of this place." He reached into the folds of his cloak and withdrew a mask, a feathered creation that shimmered with silvery light. He held it out to the prince. "Take this. When the time comes, you'll know what to do." Before Caelus could respond, the man dissolved into shadow, his form unraveling like smoke in the wind. The mask fell to the ground with a soft clatter, its surface dulling to an ashen grey. The prince picked it up, its weight unfamiliar in his hands. As he turned back to the ballroom, the music seemed louder, the laughter sharper and the light dimmer. A new unease settled over him. He glanced at the great clock hanging above the ballroom's center. Its pendulum swung in perfect silence, its hands circling endlessly. Midnight, he realized, had not come, and deep within, he wondered if it ever would. The grand clock loomed over the ballroom, a sentinel of frozen time. Its intricate face was adorned with carvings of celestial bodies, their features so lifelike they seemed to shift and shimmer under the flickering lantern light. Yet, for all its grandeur, the clock refused to mark the passage of time. Its hands turned endlessly, tracing the same circle, never nearing the forbidden hour. Caelus stood beneath it, the feathered mask still clutched in his hand. The ballroom swirled around him, an unending tide of masked figures whose laughter echoed like distant thunder. Each guest moved as if guided by invisible strings, their feet gliding across the marble floor with an otherworldly grace. The prince's gaze fixed on the pendulum, its motion hypnotic and maddeningly precise. He felt its rhythm resonate in his chest, as if the very room pulsed with its silent heartbeat. "Why does it not strike 12? He murmured aloud, though he expected no answer. "You'll find no comfort in that question," came a voice, low and melodic. He turned to see a figure clad in shades of sapphire and gold, their mask a mosaic of broken glass that caught the light in fractured brilliance. The figure held a goblet filled with a liquid so dark it seemed to drink the light around it. "You're not the first to wonder," they continued, their voice veiled with an air of distant sorrow. "But the truth lies not in the clock, but in yourself." "What truth?" Caelus asked, his grip tightening on the mask. The figure tilted their head as if weighing their answer. "The clock does not strike midnight, because midnight is the moment of reckoning. It is the hour when masks are shed and all truths are laid bare. But here, in the eternal masquerade, such revelations are forbidden." The words sent a shiver through the prince. Forbidden by whom? The figure's gaze flickered to the great clock. By the one who governs this place, the Masked Eternum. They weave the music, hold the strings, and guard the secret that keeps us bound. "Bound?" Caelus echoed. "Are you prisoners?" The figure's laugh was soft, almost wistful. "Aren't we all?" Before the prince could press further, the figure melted back into the crowd, their form dissolving into the endless waltz. The goblet they held slipped from their hand, shattering upon the floor and spilling its inky contents. The liquid slithered like a living thing, vanishing into the cracks of the marble. The prince's unease deepened as he turned his attention back to the dancers. Their laughter, once melodic, now grated on his ears, a hollow sound that carried no warmth. Their masks, once dazzling, now seemed to leer at him with unspoken mockery. He stepped away from the ballroom's center, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of escape. He noticed doors that led to other parts of the castle, their frames adorned with intricate carvings of moons and stars. Each seemed to promise secrets hidden beyond the veil of the masquerade. Choosing a door at random, he slipped through it, leaving the music behind. He entered a dim corridor lined with ornate mirrors. Each reflected a fragment of the ballroom, distorted and warped, as though the glass itself rejected the truth of what it had seen. At the end of the corridor, he found a small alcove housing a peculiar clock. Unlike the grand clock in the ballroom, this one was plain and unadorned, its face cracked and its hands frozen at a single hour. Midnight. Caelus reached out to touch it, but a voice stopped him. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." He spun to see the elder who had given him the mask, now leaning against the wall with a knowing smile. "What is this place?" the prince demanded, his frustration spilling over. "Why am I here?" The elder's eyes glinted with a mix of pity and amusement. "You are here because you stepped through the veil, because you sought something you could not name. The masquerade reveals what you hide, but only if you are willing to see." "And the clock?" Caelus asked, gesturing towards the broken timepiece. "It is a relic of what this place once was," the elder replied, his tone growing somber. "A reminder that time is not an enemy, but a gift. When midnight strikes, the masks fall and the truth is revealed. But here, in this cursed realm, we are denied that release." The prince felt the weight of the elder's words settle upon him. The mask in his hand seemed heavier, its surface growing colder. "Then how do I make the clock strike?" he asked, his voice firm. The elder's gaze sharpened. "The answer lies in the mask you carry, and the courage to face what it shows you. But beware, young prince. Truth is not always what we desire, and once revealed, it cannot be undone." Before Caelus could respond, the elder vanished once more, leaving him alone with the silent clock and the growing weight of his own uncertainty. Caelus returned to the ballroom with the elder's words circling in his mind like a falcon hunting prey. The music greeted him as before, a hauntingly beautiful waltz that beckoned him into its eternal rhythm. Yet now, it felt different, its beauty tinged with a sinister undertone, as if the melody itself mocked his search for meaning. The masked revelers swirled around him, their laughter hollow and their eyes unreadable behind their ornate disguises. He watched their movements closely, seeking some flaw, some crack in the perfection of the masquerade. "Do you see them now?" a soft voice murmured beside him. Startled, Caelus turned to find a dancer clad in ivory, their masks smooth and featureless, reflecting his own visage in a distorted haze. Their voice was neither male nor female, but something in between, a spectral whisper that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. "See what?" he asked cautiously. "The unseen," the figure replied. "The truth beneath the masks. It is everywhere, yet nowhere. You've begun to glimpse it, haven't you?" Caelus's hand tightened around the feathered mask he carried. "If I have, it is not by choice. I didn't come here to play these games." The figure tilted their head, a faint ripple of amusement passing through their voice. "Yet here you are, a pawn moved by forces you cannot name. Come, Prince, dance with me. Perhaps the steps will guide you to what you seek." Before he could refuse, the figure took his hand and led him into the throng of dancers. The music swelled, and the crowd seemed to part around them, creating a space that felt both vast and suffocating. The figure's movements were strange, their steps unpredictable and unsettling. They led Caelus through a dance unlike any he had known, a sequence of spirals and sharp turns that left him disoriented. With each step, the world around him seemed to shift. The ballroom's walls flickered, revealing glimpses of darkened corridors and shadowy figures watching from unseen corners. "Do you see them now?" the figure repeated, their voice sharper, almost demanding. "I see shadows," Caelus replied, his breath quickening. "But what are they?" "They are the unseen truths of this place," the figure said, their grip on his hand tightening. "They are the guests who no longer dance, the secrets buried beneath the masks. They are what you must face if you wish to escape." As the figure spoke, their mask began to change. Its smooth surface cracked, revealing glimpses of a face beneath, a face that shifted and blurred as if it were not fixed in form. The sight unnerved Caelus, and he instinctively pulled away. The figure released him without resistance, their laughter ringing out like the chime of broken glass. "You are not ready," they said, their voice fading as they dissolved into the crowd. Caelus staggered back, his mind reeling. The ballroom had grown darker, the lanterns dimmed as if drained of their light. The revelers now moved in jerky, unnatural patterns, their laughter distorted and echoing unnaturally in the cavernous space. He turned his gaze upward, toward the great clock. Its pendulum still swung, but its motion had slowed, each arc heavier than the last. The hands remained trapped in their endless cycle, circling the edge of the face but never daring to touch midnight. His eyes were drawn to the feathered mask in his hand. It felt heavier now, its surface colder, almost alive. He remembered the elder's words. "The answer lies in the mask you carry, and the courage to face what it shows you." Caelus raised the mask to his face, hesitating. He felt the weight of the unseen pressing down upon him, a suffocating presence that seemed to emanate from the walls, the floor, the very air. "Do I dare?" he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the growing cacophony of the ballroom. Before he could decide, a figure emerged from the crowd. It was the elder, cloaked once more in midnight hues, his eyes glinting with an otherworldly light. "The dance reveals much, does it not?" the elder said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "But the dance alone is not enough. To break the cycle, you must step beyond it." "And how do I do that?" Caelus demanded, his frustration boiling over. The elder pointed to the mask. "Wear it. See what it shows you. But be warned, the truths it reveals will change you forever." Caelus stared at the mask, its feathers shimmering with a strange, ethereal light. The weight of the moment pressed down upon him, the air thick with anticipation. Finally, he placed the mask over his face. The world erupted in light and shadow, and the unseen truths of the masquerade began to unravel before his eyes. The moment the feathered mask touched Caelus's face, the world shattered like glass underfoot. The ballroom dissolved into a whirlwind of fractured images, each shard a glimpse of a hidden truth. He staggered, the weight of the mask pressing against his skin like iron, his vision swimming in a cascade of memories and shadows. When the chaos subsided, he found himself standing in an unfamiliar place. The ballroom was gone, replaced by a chamber of mirrored walls. Each surface reflected a version of him, yet none were entirely his own. Some images showed him in royal splendor, his crown radiant and his smile serene. Others depicted him broken, his clothes torn, his face etched with despair. But one reflection froze him in place. It showed him wearing the mask of the Masked Eternum, the very symbol of the eternal masquerade. His eyes behind it were hollow, lifeless, as if the mask had consumed him. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling as it echoed against the mirrored walls. "The truths you refuse to see," a voice answered from the shadows. The elder stepped into view, his midnight cloak swirling like smoke around him. His presence filled the room with a weight that pressed down on Caelus's chest. "You carry the mask, but do you understand it?" the elder asked, his tone sharp and probing. Caelus turned to the elder, his fists clenched. "You keep speaking in riddles. If there is truth to this place, then show it to me plainly." The elder regarded him with a look of pity. "Truth is never plain, young prince. It is as much shadow as it is light, and only those willing to bear both can wield it." He gestured to the mirrors. "Look closer and tell me what you see." Reluctantly, Caelus approached the mirror that showed him crowned. He studied his reflection, noting the pride in his stance, the gleam of power in his eyes. Yet as he looked closer, he saw cracks forming along the edges of the image, the gold of his crown tarnishing, his smile turning brittle. "This is who I wish to be," he said, his voice quieter now. A ruler who is strong, admired, and unbreakable." The elder nodded, then gestured to another mirror, the one where Caelus appeared defeated. "And this?" The prince hesitated before stepping closer. The reflection showed him crumpled on the ground, his hands clawing at the earth as if searching for something lost. Pain radiated from every line of his face. "This is who I fear I will become," Caelus admitted, the words bitter on his tongue. The elder's gaze remained steady. "And the mask you wear in this moment, what does it reveal?" Caelus reached up to touch the feathered mask. Its surface pulsed faintly, as if alive. The elder stepped aside, revealing another mirror hidden behind him. This reflection chilled the prince to his core. He saw himself as a hollow figure, the mask fused to his face, its feathers growing darker with every passing second. Behind him, the ballroom loomed, filled with revelers whose masks melted into their skin, their laughter a symphony of despair. "This," the elder said, his voice solemn, "is what happens to those who hide for too long. The mask becomes the face. The masquerade becomes the soul." Caelus turned away, the weight of the revelations crushing him. Then how do I escape? How do I stop this from becoming my truth? The elder stepped forward and placed a hand on the prince's shoulder. "The key lies not in rejecting the mask, but in understanding it. Every mask carries a piece of truth, a fragment of desire or fear. To break the cycle, you must embrace the whole of yourself, light and shadow, triumph and failure." As the elder spoke, a faint glow appeared in the prince's hand. He looked down to find the feathered mask shimmering with an inner light, its surface no longer cold, but warm, almost comforting. "What do I do with it?" Caelus asked, his voice steadying. "Wear it one last time," the elder replied. "But this time, let it show you not who you pretend to be, but who you truly are. Only then will the clock strike midnight." Caelus hesitated, fear flickering in his chest, but he knew there was no turning back. He placed the mask on his face once more, bracing himself for whatever truth it would reveal. The light intensified, flooding the chamber and blinding him. When it faded, he was back in the ballroom, standing beneath the grand clock. The revelers had stopped their dance, their masks turned toward him as if waiting. The clock's pendulum swung slower now, each movement echoing with a heavy finality. And then, for the first time, the clock began to chime. The first chime rang through the ballroom like a ripple in a still pond, its resonance both beautiful and terrifying. The masked revelers froze mid-step, their laughter silenced, their movements stilled. Caelus stood beneath the great clock, the feathered mask upon his face alive with energy, its warmth seeping into his very skin. The second chime followed, deeper and more commanding. The light in the ballroom shifted, dimming to a twilight hue that cast long, haunting shadows. The revelers began to turn towards Caelus, their heads moving in unison, their masks no longer beautiful, but grotesque, twisted parodies of joy and sorrow. "You've awakened the truth," a voice whispered, though it came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Caelus's hands trembled as he reached up to touch the mask. It clung to his face as if it had grown roots, its edges merging seamlessly with his skin. The ballroom around him began to fracture, its gilded walls cracking to reveal endless darkness beyond. The third chime. The air thickened, heavy with expectation. The dancers began to move again, not with the fluid elegance of before, but in jerky, chaotic motions, their limbs bending in unnatural ways. Their laughter returned, but it was sharp and discordant, echoing like shattered glass in the vast chamber. "Why do you resist?" one of the revelers hissed, their mask a hollow-eyed beast. "The masquerade offers freedom from the pain of truth." Caelus clenched his fists, his voice rising over the din. "Freedom built on lies is no freedom at all. The fourth chime. The pendulum above him swung slower now, each movement straining as if against the weight of centuries. The air grew colder, and the darkness seeped further into the ballroom, devouring the edges of the floor and creeping closer with each passing moment. The elder appeared again, his form wavering like smoke. "You are close, young prince. The mask has shown you fragments, but the final truth remains. Do you have the courage to see it?" Caelus's heart thundered in his chest, but he nodded. "I have no choice." The elder extended his hand, and in it appeared a shard of mirrored glass. Then shatter the illusion, break the mask, and with it, the chains that bind you. The fifth chime. Caelus took the shard, its edge glinting with a dangerous light. He raised it to his face, hesitating for only a moment before he drove it against the mask. The first strike cracked its surface, sending a jolt of pain through his body. He gritted his teeth and struck again and again, until the mask began to crumble. With each blow, the world around him trembled. The dancers screamed, their masks falling away to reveal hollow, featureless faces. The clock groaned as its hands shuddered, inching closer to midnight. The sixth chime. The mask shattered completely, its pieces falling to the ground like fragments of a broken star. Caelus staggered, his vision blurring as light and shadow swirled around him. For a moment, he thought he would be consumed by the chaos. Then, silence. The ballroom was gone, replaced by a serene stillness. Caelus found himself standing in an open field under a sky filled with countless stars. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of earth and freedom. He reached up to his face and found it bare. The mask was gone, and with it, the weight he hadn't realized he had been carrying. A figure stepped out of the shadows. It was the elder, though now he looked younger, his eyes bright and his smile gentle. "You have broken the cycle," the elder said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "The masquerade no longer binds you." "But the others?" Caelus asked, glancing back at the castle, now a distant silhouette. "They must find their own truths," the elder replied. "You have shown them the way. Whether they follow is their choice." The seventh chime echoed faintly, distant and fading. Caelus turned toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn was breaking. He felt a sense of clarity, of peace, that he had never known. "Thank you," he said, though he wasn't sure if he spoke to the elder, the mask, or the truth itself. The elder nodded and stepped back into the shadows, leaving Caelus alone under the growing light of day. The prince returned to his kingdom with a renewed sense of purpose. He ruled, not with the mask of strength, but with the honesty of a man who had faced himself. Though the memory of the masquerade lingered in his dreams, he carried its lesson with him always. The greatest freedom comes not from hiding behind a mask, but from breaking it. And far away, in the ruins of the ancient castle, the great clock finally struck midnight and then stopped, its hands forever frozen at the hour of truth.